I thought I had everything: a six-figure job in San Francisco, a luxury apartment with a bay view, and the kind of independence people envy. But peace? That was the one thing money couldn't buy. Every night, the city screamed while I lay awake wondering how success could still feel so empty. Then, one decision changed everything. I bought a quiet little house outside the city, ready to start fresh. But the moment I told my family, things took a dark turn. My sister demanded my apartment, my mother took her side, and before I knew it, my own blood had broken into my home and dared me to call the police. What came next tore my family apart, but it also set me free. I've lived in San Francisco for nearly a decade now, and on paper, my life looked perfect. I'm 31 years old, a software developer at a major tech company downtown. My salary is comfortable high six figures, and my apartment in Soma is the kind of place most people only dream about. It's on the 22nd floor, with a sweeping view of the bay and floor-to-ceiling windows that light up every sunrise. But despite all that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was suffocating. Every night, the city screamed around me: sirens, car alarms, people yelling in the street at 2 a.m. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd worked so hard for a home I couldn't even rest in. My coffee table alone cost more than my first car, and yet it gave me zero peace. I was burning out, fast. One evening, I drove down Highway 1, windows down, just to hear something other than chaos. The ocean air felt like medicine. That's when it hit me: I didn't want more success or fancier things. I wanted quiet, real quiet. The kind you can only find where the air smells like pine trees instead of exhaust fumes. Within a week, I called my realtor, told her exactly what I was looking for: a small house about an hour outside the city, somewhere peaceful but close enough that I could still work remotely. She found it: a cozy 2-bedroom place on a little acre of land, broadband internet, a porch big enough for morning coffee, and a view of the hills that made you forget the rest of the world existed. The math was tight, though. Between the down payment, property taxes, and the mortgage, I couldn't afford to keep both places unless I found a way to make my apartment pay for itself. That's when the plan came together: rent out the Soma apartment. The market rate would more than cover the new mortgage, maybe even leave a little cushion. I hired a management company, paid for professional photos, and had my lawyer draft a bulletproof lease. I upgraded the locks, installed a top-tier security system, and spent 2 weekends polishing every corner until the place looked ready for a magazine spread. It wasn't just a rental, it was an investment, the proof of all my years of work. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was steering my own life again. I could almost hear silence waiting for me in that country house, the kind that fills your head with peace instead of pressure. As I packed my things, I promised myself this wasn't running away, it was reclaiming my sanity. I'd built everything from scratch, and now I was finally ready to live on my own terms. A few days after finalizing the mortgage for my new country house, I drove to my parents' place in Daly City to tell them the news. It was a typical foggy Bay Area afternoon, the kind that makes the whole neighborhood look washed in gray. Mom was in the kitchen, making tea like she always did, and Dad was sitting in his recliner, half watching the evening news. I felt proud walking through that front door, ready to share how I'd finally built a life that felt balanced. I bought a house, I said, smiling. A small one out in the country, about an hour from here. I'll work from home and rent out the Soma apartment to cover the mortgage. Dad nodded approvingly, the corner of his mouth twitching up in a small smile. Smart move, he said. Real estate that pays for itself. That's how you build wealth. But Mom's reaction was different. She froze, teacup in midair. You're renting your apartment to strangers? She asked, her brows knitting. What if they ruin it, or steal from you? I'm not worried, I said. The management company handles everything, and the lease is airtight. Before I could explain further, the front door swung open with a bang. My sister, Melissa, swept in like a gust of chaos, trailed by her 3 kids ages 8, 6, and 4, each holding some kind of snack or toy. Within seconds, the quiet living room turned into a playground of screens and cereal crumbs. Hey, she said cheerfully, plopping down on the couch beside me. What's this I hear about you renting your apartment? I hesitated. Yeah, to help pay for my new place. Her smile widened, but not in a good way. It was the kind of smile that told you she'd already decided something in her head. Then rent it to me, she said. I blinked. What? Me and the kids. We're cramped in our apartment, 2 bedrooms, no yard, noisy neighbors. Your place has space, great schools, and that nice park across the street. It'd be perfect for us. Melissa, I can't, I said carefully. I need the rent to cover the mortgage. I can't afford to just let someone live there for free. Her face shifted immediately, the warmth evaporated. You're kidding, right? You make way more than I do, Emily. You can afford it. That's not the point, I replied. This isn't about charity. It's a business decision. Melissa's voice rose an octave. So, you'd charge your own sister rent? Before I could answer, Mom stepped in, drying her hands with a towel. Emily, your sister has 3 children. You don't. You should help her. I felt the heat rising in my chest. Help her how? By paying 2 mortgages so she can live comfortably while I struggle? Don't exaggerate, Mom said, frowning. Family helps family. Dad stayed silent, eyes fixed on the TV like he wanted no part of this. Melissa crossed her arms, glaring at me. You know what your problem is, Emily? You think money matters more than people. You live up in your fancy apartment with your fancy job, acting like you're better than everyone else. That's not fair, I said, my voice tight. I worked hard for what I have. I'm not giving it away because you made bad choices. Her jaw dropped. Bad choices? I married a loser who left me. I'm raising 3 kids alone. That's not a bad choice, that's life. And this, I said quietly, is my life. I'm not going to apologize for wanting to protect it. Mom's tone turned sharp. God wants those who have to share with those who don't. You've been blessed, Emily. Don't turn your back on your family. I looked at her, then at Melissa, both staring at me like I was the villain in their story. For years, I tried to be the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who fixed things. But at that moment, something inside me snapped. I'm not running a charity, I said firmly. I worked for what I have. And I'm renting to paying tenants. End of discussion. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, the angry kind. You're ungrateful, she shouted. We're family, and you're treating us like we're nothing. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked to the door. I'm treating you like adults, I said. Which means you can handle your own responsibilities. The room went silent, except for the faint sound of the news anchor on the TV talking about traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge. I didn't look back as I left. Driving home, I felt torn. A part of me ached with guilt. Melissa was struggling, and the kids didn't deserve to suffer. But another part, the quieter, steadier part, knew this was right. I'd spent my whole life cleaning up after other people's chaos. For once, I was choosing myself. As the city skyline came into view, glittering in the distance, I realized something. You can love your family and still refuse to be their safety net. Love doesn't mean surrender. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they learned that too. A week later, my phone buzzed with good news. David Miller, the property manager I'd hired, had found potential tenants, a married couple working as engineers at Google. Their credit was flawless, their references spotless, and they were ready to move in within days. Relief washed over me. Finally, everything was falling into place. I scheduled a showing for Friday afternoon and drove into the city early, wanting to make sure everything looked perfect before they arrived. The moment I stepped out of the elevator on the 22nd floor, something felt off. The hallway was unusually noisy, children laughing, a faint cartoon theme song echoing through the corridor. My stomach tightened. That shouldn't be coming from my apartment. I unlocked the door and froze. The sleek, modern space I'd left behind looked like it had been hit by a small tornado. My $2,000 walnut coffee table was shoved against the wall, a half-empty milk carton and a box of cereal sitting on top of it. My designer sofa, gray, velvet, custom-made, was buried under blankets, toys, and a half-eaten bag of chips. Crayon scribbles covered the corner of my $400 art book that had once been my pride and joy. And there, sitting on my couch in sweatpants, watching cartoons at full volume, was Melissa. For a split second, I couldn't speak. The only sound was the blaring TV and the crunch of chips in her mouth. Then she looked up, startled but not guilty. Just annoyed. Oh, hey, she said casually, brushing crumbs off her lap. Mom gave me the spare key. We moved in yesterday. I blinked, thinking I must have misheard her. You did what? She rolled her eyes. Relax, Emily. The place was just sitting empty. You said you were moving to the country house, so we figured it made sense. The kids love it here. Before I could answer, David Miller appeared behind me with the couple the Tanaka right on time for their showing. Mr. Tanaka wore a suit and polite smile. Mrs. Tanaka clutched her purse, glancing from me to Melissa to the chaos around the room. Her expression said it all. We're leaving. Wait, please, I started, stepping forward. But they were already backing toward the elevator. I'm sorry, Mr. Tanaka said quietly, avoiding my eyes. And just like that, my perfect tenants were gone. When the elevator doors closed, I turned back to Melissa, who was still lounging like this was all perfectly normal. Get out, I said, my voice steady. She snorted. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic, we're family. Mom said we could live here. Mom doesn't own this apartment. I do. You need to leave, now. Melissa picked up the remote, turned the volume up, and said without looking at me, if you don't like it, call the police. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Something inside me shifted. For years, I'd let her get away with everything, her tantrums, her manipulations, her constant demands, but this was my home. My sanctuary. So I pulled out my phone and started dialing. Melissa's smirk faltered. Wait, what are you doing? I looked her straight in the eyes. Exactly what you told me to do. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice echoed through the speaker. Yes, I said clearly, I need to report an illegal entry into my apartment. Several people entered without permission and are refusing to leave. Melissa's face went pale. Emily, stop. You can't be serious. But I didn't stop. I gave the operator my address, my apartment number, my name. I could hear my niece crying softly in the background, the sound tugging at my heart, but I didn't let it stop me. Within 10 minutes, 2 officers arrived, Carter, older and calm, and Reed, younger and firm. I showed them my ID and the property deed stored on my phone. They nodded, professional and direct. We went upstairs together. When I unlocked the door, Melissa stood frozen, her kids clinging to her legs. Ma'am, Officer Carter said, the owner has requested that you leave. You need to pack your things and go. She's my sister, Melissa shouted. This is a family issue. Family doesn't override property law, Reed replied. If you refuse to leave, you're trespassing. That's when she lost it. She lunged toward me, screaming, you're ruining my life. The officers moved fast, restraining her before she could touch me. Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer, Carter said calmly, snapping the cuffs around her wrists. The kids burst into tears. My hands shook, but I stood my ground. My phone rang, it was Mom. I put it on speaker. Emily, what have you done? She cried. Melissa said the police are there. I called them, I said. You gave her my spare key. She broke into my home. How dare you? She's your sister. She's a grown woman who broke the law, I replied coldly. This isn't a family matter anymore, it's a legal one. I hung up before she could scream another word. As the officers led Melissa out, she glared at me with pure hatred. You'll regret this, she shouted through tears. But I didn't. Not then. Not later. Because in that moment, for the first time in my life, I'd finally stopped letting my family walk all over me. The sound of the elevator doors closing behind Melissa echoed in my head long after the police car disappeared from the front of the building. I stood in the middle of my wrecked apartment, surrounded by toys, cereal, and crayon marks, and for the first time in years, I wasn't shaking out of fear, I was shaking from release. My heart pounded like a drum, not because of guilt, but because I'd finally done what I should have done years ago. Minutes later, Officer Carter came back upstairs to give me a copy of the report. Miss Parker, your sister's being processed now, he said, his tone steady, professional. Since it's her first offense, she'll likely be released within a few hours, but she's officially banned from re-entering this property. If she tries again, you call us immediately. I nodded, exhaling for what felt like the first real breath in weeks. Thank you, officer. As the door shut behind him, I sank onto the arm of my couch. The kids' tiny fingerprints were still on the coffee table, and their toys were scattered across the rug. It hurt, in a quiet, distant way. They didn't deserve this chaos. But Melissa had dragged them into it just like she dragged everyone into her storms. My phone buzzed again. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something inside me, the part still craving closure, made me answer. Emily. She shouted the moment I picked up, "How could you do this to your own sister?" She called me crying from the police station. She told me to call the police, so I did, I said calmly. Don't you dare twist this around, she's your blood. You humiliated her in front of her children. She broke into my home, I said, my voice low but firm. You gave her a spare key without asking me. You started this, Mom. You heartless girl, she screamed. Those are your nieces and nephew. You think money makes you better than family? I stared at the mess around me, the crumpled chip bags, the stains on my couch, the ruin of something I'd worked years to build. No, I said quietly. Money doesn't make me better. But boundaries do. I hung up. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the start of it. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a garbage bag, and started cleaning. Piece by piece, I picked up every reminder of their intrusion, every broken toy, every crushed cracker, every little thing that screamed entitlement. When I was done, I called a locksmith. By the time the new locks were installed, it was past midnight. I stood by the window, looking out at the glittering skyline of San Francisco. Somewhere out there, my family was probably calling me every name in the book. Ungrateful, cold, unforgiving. But for once, I didn't care. I'd lived too long under their guilt. The next morning, I packed every one of Melissa's belongings into boxes, her clothes, the kids' toys, her makeup bag, and sent them by courier to my parents' house. No note, no explanation. Just closure in cardboard. Later that day, David Miller from the management company called. His voice was hesitant, apologetic. Emily, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. That was completely out of line. Don't worry, I'll find you better tenants, real tenants. Just give me a week. Thank you, David Miller, I said softly. And don't worry about yesterday. It wasn't your fault. After the call, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee. The city buzzed below, indifferent and loud as always, but for once, I didn't feel trapped by it. I was done letting guilt dictate my life. That night, I drove back to my country house. The air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of pine. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I felt a wave of calm that I hadn't felt in years. The silence was deep, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a blanket. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, just being. For years, I'd let my family treat me like their safety net, like my hard work was a communal resource. But that night, I realized something crystal clear: family doesn't mean ownership. Love doesn't mean submission, and forgiveness doesn't mean letting people trample over you again and again. Melissa had wanted me to call the police. Maybe she thought I never would, maybe she assumed I'd cave like always. But I did call, and in doing so, I didn't just protect my apartment, I reclaimed my life. As I looked out at the moonlight spilling across the yard, I whispered to myself, never again. No more guilt. No more manipulation, no more family drama. Just peace. Real, earned, deserved peace. 6 months passed before I heard anything about Melissa again. By then, life had settled into a calm rhythm. My mornings started with coffee on the porch, the sound of birds replacing the sirens and chaos of San Francisco. Work was steady, my tenants were respectful, and for the first time in years, I could think without guilt creeping in. Then one evening, just as the sun was dipping below the hills, my phone rang. The caller ID said Aunt Diane. My mom's older sister had always been the family's black sheep, or maybe the only sane one. She'd built her own business, never asked for help, never played favorites. When she called, I knew she wasn't phoning for drama. Hi, Aunt Diane, I said, settling into the porch chair. It's been a while. Hello, dear, she said, her voice warm but serious. I wanted to talk to you about what happened with your sister. Your mother's been calling everyone, trying to make you sound like the villain. But don't worry, I know better. I let out a slow breath. I figured she'd twist it somehow. She did, Diane said. But word travels, people know what really happened, that Melissa broke into your place and got herself arrested. I've heard things aren't going well for her. I stayed quiet, listening. She avoided criminal charges, my aunt continued. The prosecutor let her off easy because of the kids. But her life's been, well, let's just say it's unraveling. Her landlord refused to renew her lease after hearing about the arrest. She and the kids are living in a small apartment on the edge of town now, rough neighborhood, rundown building, bad schools. I looked out at the horizon, the sky painted pink and gold. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. The kids didn't deserve that. But I also knew Melissa had made her choices. She's been trying to find work, Diane said, but word got around. No one wants to deal with her attitude or her drama. Even your parents stopped helping her as much. They're embarrassed, afraid people will talk. I bit my lip. That sounds like them. She still blames you, of course, my aunt said. Says you ruined her life. But from where I'm standing, she did that all by herself. For a long moment, I didn't speak. There was guilt, yes, a quiet, dull ache that came from knowing how far things had fallen. But beneath that guilt was a stronger, steadier truth: I had done the right thing. I just couldn't let her keep walking over me, I finally said. She thought family meant I owed her everything I worked for. And that's exactly why she needed to fall, Diane replied. Sometimes, the only way people like Melissa learn is through consequences. You did her a favor, whether she sees it or not. Her words sank in. I thought about Melissa's kids, how they must look at their mother now, how confused they probably felt. Maybe one day they'd understand, maybe they'd even thank me for breaking the cycle. Diane's tone softened. You're not cruel, Emily, you're just tired of being used. There's a difference. Your mother and sister have confused kindness with weakness for years. You finally showed them that those two aren't the same thing. I swallowed hard. Thank you, I said quietly. I needed to hear that. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the stars blinking above the treetops. I thought about how different my life was now, how peaceful. No angry calls, no guilt trips, no emergencies that weren't mine to solve, just silence. Melissa's downfall wasn't something I celebrated. It wasn't revenge, it was reality catching up to her. For years, she'd lived in a bubble where every mistake was forgiven, every boundary erased by my parents' excuses. When that bubble burst, she didn't know how to survive. And maybe that was the saddest part. I hoped that one day, she'd learn from it, that she'd teach her kids something different, something stronger. But I also knew that wasn't my burden anymore. I'd carried this family long enough. That night, before going inside, I whispered a quiet truth to myself: you can love people from a distance. And sometimes, distance is the only kind of love they'll let you give. The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of Melissa's chaos on my shoulders. She had her life. I had mine. And I wasn't going to trade peace for guilt ever again. Aunt Diane kept calling every few weeks after that first conversation, checking in not out of pity but out of genuine care. She was one of those rare family members who didn't sugarcoat things, who believed in accountability over appearances. Her voice had that calm, grounded strength that made you stop and listen, not because she demanded respect, but because she'd earned it. One evening, she called just as I was finishing dinner. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon from the roast chicken in the oven, and the sky outside my kitchen window was painted in dusky shades of violet. Life had become quiet, measured, steady, the exact opposite of what it had been before. "Hi, Aunt Diane," I said, smiling as I put her on speaker. "How's Boston treating you?" "Cold as ever," she laughed, "but business is good." "I just wanted to see how you're doing, dear." "I'm good," I said truthfully. "Peaceful. For once." "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. Then her tone softened. "I spoke with your mother again. She's still angry, but mostly embarrassed now. People know the story. And frankly, most of them agree with you." That caught me off guard. "They do?" "Oh, yes. Everyone's tired of Melissa's drama. It's amazing how quickly sympathy disappears when people realize the facts." I leaned against the counter, letting her words sink in. For so long, my family had painted me as the ungrateful one, the cold-hearted sister who turned her back on family. Hearing that others saw the truth felt like the smallest, quietest vindication. Diane continued, I told your mother she raised two daughters, one who learned to work, and one who learned to take. She didn't like that very much. I couldn't help but laugh softly. That sounds like you. She'll come around eventually, Diane said, though her voice carried a note of doubt, or maybe she won't. Either way, you did the right thing. Don't ever question that. I don't, I said. Not anymore. I used to feel guilty, but now I just feel .free. That's how it should be, she said firmly. You know, when I was your age, I had to cut ties with our side of the family for a while, too. They didn't understand boundaries then, either. They called it selfishness. But you know what? It's not selfish to want peace, it's not selfish to protect yourself from people who keep taking. Her words hit deep. Aunt Diane wasn't just validating me, she was giving me permission to stop apologizing for it. Thank you, I said quietly. You're the only one who's really said that to me. That's because most people are too scared to say the truth, she replied. They'd rather live under guilt than deal with confrontation. But you, Emily, you had the courage to face it. You set a boundary, and you stuck to it. That's strength, not cruelty. We talked for nearly an hour, about work, the garden she'd started, and the little bakery down the street she loved. But before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me. You don't have to sacrifice your peace to prove your goodness, dear. You already are good. You just stopped letting people exploit it. After the call, I stepped outside onto the porch. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the dark. I thought about how right she was. For years, I'd believed that being good meant being available, agreeable, endlessly forgiving. I'd mistaken self-sacrifice for virtue. But now, with the quiet hum of the crickets around me and the soft wind brushing my face, I understood something Aunt Diane had always known: goodness isn't about saying yes to everyone. It's about saying yes to yourself when no one else will. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch swing, and looked out at the open fields. I didn't miss the noise, or the guilt, or the endless phone calls asking for favors. I missed nothing. What I had now, peace, independence, and the wisdom that came from loss, felt infinitely more valuable than any version of family I'd had before. And somewhere deep down, I knew Aunt Diane was proud. Not because I'd stood up to Melissa or my parents, but because I'd finally stood up for myself. 2 years have passed since that day in my apartment, and I can honestly say I've never been more at peace. My life is quiet now, beautifully, intentionally quiet. I wake up to the sound of birds instead of sirens, make coffee in my sunny kitchen, and start my workday with nothing but calm in my chest. The mortgage on my country house is completely covered by the rent from my San Francisco apartment. The Japanese couple who live there turned out to be perfect tenants, respectful, punctual, and kind. They even sent me a handwritten thank you card for maintaining such a beautiful home. Sometimes, when I sit on my porch at sunset, I think about how different things could have been if I'd caved that day, if I'd let Melissa move in, if I'd allowed guilt to run my life again. I know exactly what would have happened. She would have stayed rent-free, complained about the smallest things, expected more, and somehow made me feel like I wasn't doing enough. My savings would have drained, my nerves would have frayed, and I'd still be stuck in the same cycle of resentment I'd lived in for years. Instead, I chose peace. I chose myself. My parents never spoke to me again after Melissa's arrest. No calls, no texts, not even a holiday card. At first, that silence hurt. I kept thinking maybe they'd come around, maybe they'd realize I wasn't the monster they'd made me out to be, but they didn't, and eventually, I stopped waiting. There's a strange kind of freedom in letting go of people who refuse to see your worth. You grieve it, and then you breathe easier. Aunt Diane still calls. She updates me about family gossip, though it barely affects me now. She says Melissa's still struggling 2 part-time jobs, a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. The kids are growing fast, they're in public school now, doing okay. I ask about them sometimes, not out of guilt, but out of genuine hope that they'll find a better path than their mother did. Every once in a while, I wonder if they'll reach out someday when they're older, when they understand what really happened, and if they do, my door will be open. Not wide open, but open enough for honesty, for rebuilding on healthy terms. For now, though, my life is exactly what I always wanted: peaceful, stable, mine. I learned that sometimes walking away from your family isn't cruelty, it's survival. And in that survival, I finally found freedom. The story reminds us that love and loyalty don't mean sacrificing your peace or allowing others to take advantage of your kindness. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's an act of self-respect. Sometimes, walking away from toxic family patterns isn't abandonment, it's healing. As adults, we must learn that helping others should never come at the cost of our mental health or stability. True strength lies in saying no when it's necessary and understanding that protecting your peace doesn't make you selfish, it makes you wise. Peace isn't found in pleasing everyone, it's found in finally choosing yourself.